Macron is someone who has psychiatric problems. Well, now everyone recognizes it. He's someone with a spoiled child complex who can't stand any contradiction. The French had become very dissatisfied with Macron, who takes positions on a whole range of issues, notably, for example, on Ukraine. He wants to drag us into a war against Russia, even though the French were never asked for their opinion. We are in a major crisis because the French voted in 2022. They re-elected Macron as president of the Republic, actually after a campaign that never really took place, because there is a lot to be said about the way the presidential election is organized in France. But then in 2022, they sent a National Assembly that wasn't very favorable, but still allowed Macron to govern. For somewhat mysterious reasons, Macron dissolved the National Assembly in 2024. No one ever really understood why, but that in the end marked the beginning of chaos. In the meantime, the French had become very dissatisfied with Macron, who takes positions on a whole range of issues, notably, for example, on Ukraine. He wants to drag us into a war against Russia, even though the French were never asked for their opinion. There are still a huge number of French people who don't want that, don't want to go to war against Russia, or those among them who say we should go to war with Russia. It's only on the condition that their own children aren't sent. So all of this is very, very unhealthy. And in 2024, Macron dissolved the National Assembly. And he ended up with a new assembly where his supporters are very few, maybe representing 20% or 25% of the deputies. Macron is someone who has psychiatric problems. Well, now everyone recognizes it. He's someone with a spoiled child complex who can't stand any contradiction. When there are failures, and God knows there are many, it's never his fault. It's always someone else's fault. He never admits his mistakes. And in particular, he has never admitted in his mind that he no longer had a majority in the National Assembly and therefore could no longer exercise power as before. Here, Macron refused to give power to the opposition. And so since the election was fragmented, no clear majority emerged. Since 2024, Macron has been trying to govern France with a majority that supports him, which is only 15%. That doesn't work. So the underlying problem is that Mr. Macron refuses democracy. We have to call things as they are. Being his prime minister is almost unbearable. It's not for nothing, if you will, that we've changed prime ministers 7 times in 8 years. And especially since he was re-elected, we've had 4 prime ministers, I believe. You know, there's a French expression that's not very flattering, but really says what it means, which is rats leaving a sinking ship. And that's exactly it. That is to say, we can see that Macron made the careers of a number of people whom he brought out of complete obscurity. Edouard Philippe, Mr. Gabriel Attal, Ms. Nathalie Loiseau, and so on. All these people are now stabbing him in the back, and not just with one knife, but several. There you have it. His former Prime Minister Attal said he no longer understood what he was doing, what Macron was doing. Former Prime Minister Edouard Philippe said that now he should submit his resignation. So if you will, it feels a bit like something out of ancient literature. You know, when Brutus took part in the Ides of March conspiracy to assassinate Julius Caesar, there's a bit of that here. Basically, everyone thinks we're heading toward the end of Macron. Many of our powers have gone to the European Commission in Brussels, the ECB in Frankfurt, or the European Court of Human Rights, to NATO in Washington, so that we're no longer at all in the same situation as in the 1950s. Now we have French leaders who no longer really have much control. So there was this situation, this collision with, at the same time, the shortening of the presidential term. In fact, we have a system that's unstable, and because for me, that's the expression. It feels like we have leaders fighting over scraps. Since there is less and less power, it's both of them. This has resulted in the debasement of the role of Prime Minister, who has now become a sort of Chief of Staff to the President of the Republic. The French still haven't fully understood that our membership in the EU dictates 80% of our laws. They set all our strategic priorities because all of this has been carefully hidden from the French people. Moreover, all political debates in France, even today, are about pitting the right against the left, whereas in reality, for about 20 years now, the French have been seeing for themselves that whether they vote for the right or the left, in the end, they always get the same policies. And obviously, since this policy has actually been set by the broad guidelines of economic policies, by the European Commission, by the monetary policy of the ECB, by the military and diplomatic strategies of NATO. So we have an institutional crisis, a crisis caused by the loss of power due to the European treaties, a crisis caused by the weakening of the leaders' powers, a crisis due to the fact that the Prime Minister and the President of the Republic are stepping on each other's toes in terms of authority, and then a crisis caused by the particular personality of Mr. Macron. So now we've entered a phase where Macron no longer really has the possibility to appoint a new Prime Minister. In any case, if he does it, it will be very difficult for the new Prime Minister to stay in office. Maybe he'll try to go to the left. I don't know. Anything is possible, but I would be surprised. And above all, now there is an overwhelming majority of French public opinion that wants Macron to step down. The big question today is whether Macron will manage to make it to the end of his term, which is supposed to end in May 2027. That's still a long time, given how much the situation in France has deteriorated. So there are other people raising the question of resignation. But Macron has already said that he does not want to resign. So that leaves impeachment, which is provided for by the Constitution, but is very difficult to achieve. And it's likely that the far right will not want to go along with it. And then there's the dissolution of the National Assembly, which currently seems to me the most likely scenario. In any case, I would be surprised if any political party were to win an absolute majority in these legislative elections that would take place. So that means we would still be in the same situation. And in fact, the problem always comes back to the same thing, namely Macron. Normally, Macron should have resigned a long time ago because that's in line with the Constitution, which was designed to give a lot of power to the President of the Republic, but on the condition that he submits to the will of the French people. That's it. If we have a President of the Republic who doesn't want to take election results into account and uses the power given by the Constitution, then things are really not working anymore.